Well, it is 5 o'clock, so I think we will get started. I am Krista with the International Wolf Center, and thank you so much for joining us tonight. We are really excited to have our founder, Dr. Dave Mech, with us to talk about all of the experiences he had during the 25-year study in the Arctic. So just a reminder that this webinar is being recorded, so you will get the link to the recording within a few days after this original broadcast is complete. And you can also type your questions in using the Q&A tab at the bottom of your screen. So if you logged on a little early, you know that we have lots and lots and lots of excited participants for our webinar tonight. So we may not get to all of the questions live, but Dave has agreed to take a look at them afterwards, and then I can email out the answers in a few days or as soon as we are able to. And also, Dave is going to be sharing a few information links that you can use later. I will include those in the email with the link to the recording as well, so that you can just click on those and easily access those. So, and I think with that, I'm going to turn it over to Grant Spickelmeyer, our Executive Director, to introduce Dave.
All right, thanks, Krista. Yes, welcome everyone. Thank you for everyone who followed us. You know, this was originally scheduled to happen earlier in the summer, and then we had to reschedule it for now. Thank you for those who followed along, and I actually think we maybe added a few people who registered for attending tonight. This webinar is actually part of a celebration year for the International Wolf Center. We're celebrating a lot of milestones. The 30th anniversary of the opening of our visitor center up in Ely. Of course, Dr. Mech was our founder and very involved in the founding of the visitor center up in Ely. So that was one of the reasons we were hosting this webinar. This is also the celebration of the culmination of 57 years of studying wolves in the Superior National Forest. So Dave's study in northern Minnesota, the Superior National Forest wolf deer study, closed last year. And we're going to be sending out a special issue to all of our members in the next couple of months, highlighting the results of that work, which is a pretty amazing, years and years of data gathered, and lots of people who've worked with Dave on that project, and lots of really important findings that came out of that work. So that will be coming in the next couple of months. But of course, tonight we're going to be talking about Dave's 25 years, which is maybe small in comparison to the 57-year study, but still an pretty impressive legacy of research with Arctic wolves. And for me, this one's a little personal, because I remember watching the National Geographic White Wolf video back when you had to set your schedule and be in front of the television on a Saturday evening, turning on PBS at 8 o'clock at night to see the National Geographic special for the week, and you listen to that theme song, that National Geographic theme song. And then today we're going to explore the world of the white wolf. And that was just, a really compelling, I still remember the video he got of wolves, kind of the unprecedented close-up views into the life of wolf families and the harsh conditions of the Arctic. So I'm really excited to hear more from Dr. Mech tonight about that work. One last plug before I turn it over to Dave. If you would like to see Dr. Mech in person presenting, we have another opportunity coming up on October 12th. We are hosting our Howl at the Moon Gala in St. Paul, Minnesota. And we'd love to have as many of you as possible come to our fundraising gala and hear from Dave. We'll also be having presentations live via video conference from the International Wolf Center in Ely. and it will be hosted at the Bell Museum of Natural History, which has a lot of interesting displays and a lot of things to explore there as well. So I invite you all to come join us again on October 12th. And with that, I'm gonna give a very brief bio for Dave. I have a feeling a lot of the people who've registered for tonight know Dave and know his work already, but for those of you who aren't aware of who Dr. Mech is, Dr. L. David Mech is a biologist with the U.S. Geological Survey, and he's still an active adjunct professor at the University of Minnesota. He's researched wolves since 1958 in locations all over the globe: Minnesota, Isle Royale, Alaska, Yellowstone National Park, Ellesmere Island, and Italy. And especially important to us, he is the founder of the International Wolf Center. So thank you, Dave, for being here tonight, and you can take it away.
Thank you, Grant, and thank you, the audience, for tuning in this evening here in Minnesota, where we now have a temperature today right now of 98 degrees. I hate to say that, but that's the way it is right now here. Anyway, let me give you just a little bit of background that I think will allow you to understand just what this particular project meant to me. It started in 1986, and at that time there were no wolves in Yellowstone Park. In fact, there were very few wolves in the 48 states. Most of them were in Minnesota, or all of them were in Minnesota and Isle Royale, Michigan. And thus it was very difficult to be able to go anywhere to see a wolf. And that was true for we biologists as well. So my career, starting, as Grant said, in 1958, and by 1986, during that whole period, was primarily using aircraft in winter to follow wolves in the snow, where we could see them in winter, catching them in summer and putting radio collars on them and listening for their signals to see where the wolves went and find out which ones died and that type of thing. But it did not include being able to watch wolves anywhere. However, when I did my 1970 book, I realized that from some of the literature I had used in that book, that there were these white wolves on Ellesmere Island up towards the North Pole that were actually tame to humans. It's just that there were very few humans that lived up there or could get up there. And yet I always wanted to see one of these white Arctic wolves that I knew existed and possibly be able to get fairly close to one. So in 1986, when I got a contract from National Geographic magazine to do an article about Ellesmere Island, not the wolves on the island, but just about the island itself, the geography, vegetation, the weather, and whatever few people were there, and some of the wildlife as well, but just about the whole island. Of course, I jumped at that chance because I knew that there was a possibility from getting up there to do this study, to do this article, I might see one of these Arctic wolves. So I jumped at the chance. And what happened afterwards is what we're about to explore right now. So first, where is Ellesmere Island? Well, I mentioned it's up by the North Pole. The study area, the little dot on the map there, as you'll see, is about 700 miles south of the pole itself. And just to give you some orientation, look to the upper left of the map, you'll see where Alaska is, and then to the left side of the map where Hudson Bay is, and that'll give you, and then also you see where Russia is over to the right. So that gives you some idea of where this Ellesmere Island is. It's just very hard to get there. There's no commercial flights to go there or anything like that. However, I was able to charter or get on charter flights to go there and fly over the Arctic Ocean to get there. The first time I was there was not in summer, but rather was in April of 1986, when it was still essentially winter. it's winter there basically from about September through May or so, and this was April, so I had to wear some, basically get pretty cocooned in good clothing. And there's a constant wind there, and that wind uh, made for some pretty interesting little artifacts I found there, like this wolf track, which is a raised, imprinted track. A wolf stepped here, froze the snow, and then the wind blew out from under the frozen snow, leaving this raised wolf track. And I suppose you can guess to the right of that what that thing is. If you can't guess, it's a wolf scent mark. It's where a wolf peed. And the same thing happened. The urine froze in the snow, and then the wind blew the snow out from under it. And here are the wolves. I surely did get to see one, actually, all of these, out in the April 1986 snow of Ellesmere Island. I had a snowmobile and was able to drive around with these wolves. They were not afraid of the snowmobile and was able to drive around with them, and got to know that they were as tame as I had heard, or as I had read. So I decided to go back up there. Remember, now I had a contract from National Geographic to go there and study the island and all the various aspects of it for this article I had to write. So I went back up there in summer. This is summer. And I do have to mention that about 2/3 of the island is basically ice and snow year round, but that the other third is does have some areas that are called well, they're basically deserts up there, well, which you'll see some of the background here soon, where there are little tiny plants, no trees, just the tallest plant's about 6 inches. It's about 1,000 miles north of the tree line. But anyway, where there's some plants enough to support a few mammals that the wolves then feed on. Even in summer, however, at any time of the year, we can get these snowstorms. So it's even in the places where we have these basically these oases of deserts and all. It can still snow at any time of the year. And the basic mammals that wolves live on up there are the Arctic hare, which weighs about 10 pounds or so, and then the muskox and these caribou, which are sort of diminutive versions of basic woodland or tundra caribou, but these are called prairie caribou, a separate subspecies. Wolves prey on all of those, but on Ellesmere, their main prey, there's very few prairie caribou there, although some, but the main prey of the wolf there is the Arctic hare and the muskox. Of course, I was very interested in finding a den of wolves, and it took me a week in June of 1986 when I had a three-wheeler ATV and was able to follow a female wolf that I saw had been nursing and follow her until I found this den at the end of a rocky ridge. There was a greeting committee when I found them, and they howled and barked and all, but basically allowed me to be around that den. I didn't want to spend a lot of time around it when I first found it because I didn't want them to be disturbed and moving their pups. So I backed off right away. The next day, however, I approached this den. Now you can see this, the hole is actually under this huge sandstone rock, the actual den itself. And what I did is approach it from the opposite direction the following day, now that I knew where it was. And I basically brought a sponge rubber pad with me to put on the hill across from this den and lie on that and spy with binoculars at the den itself and just see how many adults and pups there were. It turned out there were 7 adults and 6 pups. And I was thrilled to be able to just watch them from across the way. I spent many hours lying on that pad watching the wolves. And eventually, towards late afternoon, they started getting antsy, and it looked like they wanted to go hunting. Sure enough, the adults started off and they headed in my direction. I didn't know what to do because I didn't want to disturb them. And yet I figured if I got up and walked away, that wouldn't be very good. So I just lay there on that sponge rubber pad, and I even put my face down on it so they wouldn't see any of my human skin. And I just waited for about 10 minutes to figure that they would basically have that time to pass around me and hopefully continue on their way and not be afraid of me and run off and move the pups or something. So I counted to 10. I counted to 10 minutes, got my camera ready. And when I looked up, I wasn't putting anything over on these wolves. They were still there, staring me in the face, actually. So I managed to get this shot of the one of them. Then my hat blew off, and one of the wolves grabbed my hat, ran off with it. Of course, I really needed that hat, and eventually that wolf dropped it, and I lay down, and they just waited and waited, and they finally went around me, and I went on their way hunting. So I was able to then realize that they were not so afraid of me. They were not going to be moving the pups, and that really was a huge relief, and gave me made me really understand that they were not really that afraid of humans. Couldn't believe it. In fact, they were so unafraid that when I put up my tent a quarter mile from the den, I had to put up these rocky little fence posts with streamers on it to try to hope that in the wind the streamers would blow and maybe scare the wolves away from the tent. However, it is true that it didn't always work, and you see that porthole in the tent on the side. One day I came down and the wolves were one of them had their head in the porthole, pulled out my sleeping bag, and I had to holler and shout and yell at them before they finally dropped it and ran off. Eventually, however, those wolves did learn that they were not to come around my tent, or I would bark and howl at them, and they would back off. So we kind of had sort of a little compromise here, where I stayed not too close to their den, and they stayed not too close from my abode here. But I was able to get close enough to study them. In fact, I did get too close at times. One pup came up and untied my bootlace one time. But anyway, the big finding here was that these wolves were close. I could stay close enough to these wolves to be able to record what they did, where they went, and that type of thing. In fact,
I really wanted to see just how close I could get to the pups. If I could get close enough, I could identify each one individually, perhaps, or at least find a way of marking them so that I could. And that would allow me then to see if there's any particular individual who was more aggressive than the others, or got more food, or perhaps was more exploratory. But all this would require that I get close to them. I also wanted to see just how Mom would regard me when I was that close to her pups.
It's 3 a.m. on a sunny but chilly night.
For whatever reason, Mom began to howl, and the pups joined in. I would have loved to have joined them as well, but being so close to the den, I thought perhaps my howl would have upset the entire pack. Nevertheless, I couldn't resist at least going through the motions.
Well, the real reason I did that did that fake howl, I knew that the filmmakers were filming me there, and I thought that they might want to have me howl, and then they could, if I at least did that, faked it, they'd be able to implant a little fake howl on there and show that I was that close to the den. Anyway, that's from that film that Grant mentioned, called White Wolf. And I think that's still available from National Geographic Explorer on a disc or something like that. But to get along with the program, I was very interested in pup growth and development, just how they changed over the days as I was there. And so I was able to document all of these changes in these wolves as they matured and grew and developed, as they nursed. I mean, we did a special study on nursing alone, just how often they nursed and when they weaned, which was at about 9 weeks of age. We watched as they licked up to the adults to prompt the adults to regurgitate food to them. We saw them as they snuggled with the adults, as they played on snowfields, ran through the cotton grass, played with the adults, and as they grew and developed. I was also able to follow the wolves as they did their hunting. And I recall that Arctic hares form a very important part of their diet up there. I can't say just how much, but roughly 50% on a year-round basis. And of course, I was very interested in watching them hunt muskoxen. These burly beasts are pretty formidable, and it's quite a front they put up as the wolves approach them. However, if the wolves can get the muskoxen to run, then the wolves can chase them, and when they chase them, that's when they can sometimes catch, particularly these calves, these smaller ones you see. Those are the ones they go after primarily in the summer, and we were able to watch them actually catch and kill some. In this one day, actually, they got 3 calves from this one herd. And they also killed adults, even in the summer. In winter, of course, even the calves are quite a bit larger, and they're preying on both adults and calves year round. So that was the kind of work that I was able to do from 1986 through about 2006. But things started happening after 2006. And now here's a kind of a map of the study area itself. You see where the den was, and the yellow line is basic area that I would travel around in, following the wolves as they went on their hunts and all. The trouble is that after 2006, the wolves didn't den in that area. And so in 2007, when I went up there, I couldn't just sit around a den and watch. I couldn't figure out what was going on, but in 2007, 2008, by following the wolves when I did find them, and then watching where they went, I realized what was happening. And that was that they were crossing this river that this arrow points to. That's a river that comes off the mountains and into this fjord, which the weather station noted there is headquartered on. That's called Slidry Fjord, that dark area just below the weather station. That's about 4 miles wide, that dark fjord. And that river, where the sign says inaccessible, that river comes in there, but there's a mud flats on both sides of that river, which meant I could neither walk nor use the ATV to get across. So I was faced with, in 2009, whether I should, and I learned then that the den that the wolves had been using, that they now were denning on the south side of that fjord. In 2008 and 2009, 2007, 8, and 9, I realized that that's where they were. I could actually see in 2009 with a telescope, a spotting scope, I could see from the north side of that river, I could see where they were denning, but I couldn't get there. And so it was quite a dilemma to whether I should just abandon the project, because if I couldn't just get up there and sit around the den and watch them, or couldn't even have many days following them around with my ATV, maybe I should just abandon the project. The other possibility, however, and you recall that in Minnesota, and it turns out by that time, even in other areas like Denali Park, I was using radio collars on wolves, including GPS collars. So it was very tempting to start using them here and see what I could learn with them. I had that dilemma. Well, I decided that I would start radio collaring the wolves. In 2009, then, went up there, my partner at that time, and I should say that in each summer I had at least one partner with me, usually just one, but there was a summer or two there I had two with me, and one summer 3 board members from the Wolf Center accompanied me. I think that was 2006. Anyway, this is Dean Clough, a Canadian wolf biologist, who accompanied me in 2009, and he darted a wolf. And we put this GPS collar on this wolf, whom we called Brutus. And with that collar on that wolf, I was able to sit back in Minnesota on my computer as satellites projected to the wolf the location that we got recorded in the wolf's collar. So think of that GPS collar on that wolf as being very much like your phone. Your phone, you know, has your location on it. And so as this wolf walked around, traveled around, ran and chased its prey, its location and the time and date were being recorded in that collar. Then, every so often, that information was sent to another satellite, which then sent it to a website on my computer. So I could sit at the computer and see where those wolves were going, even though I was thousands of miles away. Here again is our study area. You see where the weather station is, and that yellow line was my basic study area. And what I started learning from this GPS collar is that this wolf, and I'll tell you was with a pack, I'll show you that in a minute, but was traveling all around this island, farther out than I was able to go with my ATV. In fact, it was crossing fjords onto an adjacent island. This is actual Heiberg Island to the west, to the left of the screen there, where that wolf and his pack was traveling, especially in winter when that fjord was totally frozen over. And we know that this wolf was with a pack of at least 20 wolves, because the weather station people would now and then see those wolves and would photograph them and send me the photos. And I could check the wolf's location on my website and say, yes, that was the GPS wolf at that location. And this way we were able to determine that Brutus was the leader actually of a pack of at least 20 wolves. Here again is a shot from the weather station in the middle of winter. Now, that takes you through 2010, when I abandoned the project. In 2010, I figured that was enough. I could follow the wolf, that one wolf with the GPS collar for that time, but that I was not going to be able to continue working up there. My grandkids were getting old enough to drive. The nearest medical facility was thousands of miles away. I figured I'd better let somebody else take over the project. So I decided that one graduate student, you might have heard of him, name is Dan McNulty. He was finishing his PhD then. And in 2010, I took him up there and showed him the ropes and all, and got him interested in continuing the project. The problem was, how was he going to get funding? Make a long story short, it took a few years, but by 2014, Dan was able to persuade some filmmakers to help subsidize Dan's radio collaring some wolves. And at that time, he then joined this person here whose name is Morgan Anderson, who was a Canadian biologist who was also interested in the wolves up there. Morgan joined with Dan and also Dean Clough, who you saw earlier in the presentation. And from 2014 through 2018, these folks went up. They didn't spend much time up there, but they were able to go up and quickly dart some wolves, put these GPS radio collars on them, and then we could all sit back at our computers, including me, and continue to watch what these wolves did remotely. And what we found is there were several different wolf packs on that island. Again, you see the study area enclosed in yellow there. That's where I had spent the 1986 to 2010. And then these other wolves that they radio collared, you can see their locations here, so that there were several packs in that area, at least in the general area. And so we were able to get a different kind of information from these wolves than I had been getting previously. This is Brutus's locations, and you see that, well, sorry, this is Brutus's locations superimposed on the locations of also another wolf that Dan and his crew radio collared from 2014 to 2018. And you can see that one of them even dispersed and went way to the south end of the island. So we got a whole bunch of different kinds of information that was very interesting to us and to everyone else, because no one had ever followed any animals through the winters as far north as this, except polar bears. Some people had followed polar bears around during the winter in the same way with these GPS collars. Anyway, we were able to get this kind of information, which was also very interesting to us, quite different from being able to sit next to the wolves and be able to record what they did with a pen and pencil. Anyway, so much for what we learned over there and what we did. If those of you who might be interested in following further about what went on up there, Krista already mentioned she would send you these links here that take you to YouTube, where you can see some of this work that I did when Timothy Dalton, who was a British actor who played James Bond in a couple of the movies, two of the movies, and then this other one where you see the wolves killing a muskox, the National Geographic film that Grant mentioned earlier. There's still some parts of that up on YouTube, and Krista's going to send those titles out to you if you're interested in watching any of this this project further. The other way that you can see more, we did do some books on the project. These three books, Wolves of the High Arctic, The Arctic Wolf Living with the Pack, and The Arctic Wolf 10 Years with the Pack. We did those books. They're out of print, but I did check recently. You can go to Amazon, and if you're interested, you can buy used copies of these books for a couple of bucks. And that would give you further information about what we did up there. In addition, I'm currently finishing off a book that we're going to be calling The Ellesmere Wolves. That's going to be available in fall of 2024 that I did with Morgan and Dean. And that is being published by the University of Chicago Press. Look for that in fall of 2024. Thank you very much for your attention, and I will be able to answer some questions.
Sounds great. Thank you so much, Dave. And just for all of our participants tonight, just a reminder that you can type in your questions using the Q&A tab at the bottom of your screen, and then we'll get through as many as we can with Dave while we are on here live. So the first question is since meeting Brutus, have you ever encountered another wolf with his behaviors?
Another wolf with these behaviors?
With his behaviors. I think you had mentioned it in the section of wild wolves that we have known that it was a wolf that you were afraid of.
Yes, that was Brutus actually.
Yes.
The situation there was, this was in probably 2005 or so. Dean and I were tracking Brutus we had followed his mate the day before and lost her, and we had gone back to the same area and were searching around to see if we could find them again when Brutus showed up. Brutus showed up, and Dean and I were resting on the tundra off our machines, and Brutus came up and started sniffing around, and I was kind of lying down on my side, sort of with my head kind of on my elbow, and Brutus came around behind me. I had a day pack on, and I could not see what Brutus was doing, but I thought he might be interested in my pack because they are pretty interested in new things. And Dean was facing me. He could see what Brutus was doing, and he could see that Brutus was behind me. And I said to Dean, that wolf might want to grab my pack, and if it does, I would jump up, and I don't know what he would do if I jumped up, but that might just trigger him to attack. And I said, for the first time in my life, I'm actually afraid. And Dean said, well, I don't have much, but he had a Leatherman tool. He said, that's all I've got with me but he said, Brutus, no, he said, he's okay. He's okay. He's walking around now. And he told me that Brutus was away from me now, walking away. And then I started seeing Brutus circle around to my left, and could see that he was no longer behind me. But for that 30 seconds or so, when I didn't know what Brutus was doing behind me, I actually felt fear of that wolf. That's the only time in my life, but it was an interesting feeling.
It's an interesting experience. Were you surprised that the wolves weren't afraid of you or any of the machines that you had with?
I was very surprised, but I did have information that they were tame up there. You remember when I did that 1970 book, I had read some other literature. In fact, there is a picture in that book of a wolf that's feeding on a muskox carcass, and associated with that picture was a story. And I wrote this out in the book actually. The scientist who was up there was David Parmalee. He was a bird man studying ptarmigans, and he said that after he had taken this picture, that he had found some wolf pups, and he had picked one up and carried it to his tent, and the mother wolf had followed along behind him while he was carrying this pup to the tent. So I knew from that these wolves were not that afraid of people. But when I saw it actually myself, I just couldn't believe it. But there it was.
Sure.
And it got better and better. I mean, once I realized that they were tame, and I could be around them that much and spend time around them, then it just became almost second nature.
Yeah, for sure. Are there current monitoring or current studies happening up in the Arctic on the wolves?
Not in that area, no. No, we finished in 2018, and no one has gone up there since to do any studies. There's some films made every now and then of them up there, but no one has continued the studies.
And I know that you have told me that it is really hard to estimate the number of wolves that are up there. So do you have any estimates on how many packs were there, or are they considered endangered in the Arctic?
No, they are not considered endangered in the Arctic. They, across the whole high Arctic, there would be thousands because there's many other islands up there, and then a large part of the sort of northern rim of the continent itself, there's Arctic wolves that live there as well. So I would say they are at least in the thousands. It's probably low thousands, but that's as good a guess as I could make.
Okay. And how do they compare size-wise to the wolves in Minnesota?
Well, you know, when we weighed Brutus, I've forgotten what he weighed, but when Morgan and Dean and Dan, they radioed about 10 of them, and we do have their weights, and those wolves weighed just about the same as the Minnesota wolves. It turns out that as you go farther north from Minnesota, the wolves do get heavier. But as you get up, Minnesota's wolves, like around Ely and that's about 48 degrees north latitude. When you get up around 65 degrees north latitude, which is around 67 is the Arctic Circle, that's where they about max out. And then from there farther north, like we were up at 80 to 85 degrees, when you get up there, they start getting smaller. And so these wolves on Ellesmere, the ones we were studying, their weights were pretty much about the same as Minnesota wolves.
Great, thank you. And we already answered part of this, but the rest of this comment is really interesting. We know that the studies aren't really continuing right now, but the rest of that question is, have you worked with the Canadian forces about flying in and out of CFS alert on the north side of Ellesmere and tracking the wolves on the north side of the island? Rob had visited in 2017, and the team there described similar tame behavior as the wolves often slept on the porches of the base buildings, and they kept broken hockey sticks inside the doors to shoo the wolves away.
Yes, they are. I have been to alert. It was in April of 1986 when I was gathering more material for that National Geographic article about Ellesmere itself. So I did get to alert, and I did realize that the wolves up there are just as tame. And I think actually all across the northern Arctic, there's other radar stations and weather stations and that. And there's lots of reports of wolves being tame all across that area. It has to do with the fact that there haven't been any humans in the interior of that whole area for centuries. Any humans that lived up there, this is something I should have mentioned in the beginning. The closest human settlement to where I was, well, there was a weather station, but I'm talking about where people live and earn a living up there year round, was the south end of Ellesmere, where there's an Inuit community. Those Inuit were moved there from northern Quebec in 1958. So until 1958, there weren't even any people up there for centuries. There were Thule. The Thule people were there along the shores of the island, but not inland. And therefore, places inland where the wolves were, there were centuries where wolves never encountered a human. And so they didn't know what they were. They didn't think they were good to eat because they didn't even know what they were. And so when they finally did see people, when explorers came up there, the Inuit were moved up there in 1958. And then the weather station, that I think that was developed about 1945 or so. Until that time, there just wasn't anybody up there. And when people did come up there, most of them did not really go up there to kill wolves, but rather were for other reasons. So the wolves did not have any negative interactions with people, and so they basically stayed tame.
It's really an interesting difference between wolves that have encountered people and have had, hunting and those kinds of things that have changed their behavior. Did you ever use anything like Earthwatch's tracking timber wolves or any other kind of organizations that provided information on tracking that helped you?
In the Superior National Forest, there were times we used Earthwatch. And of course, on Isle Royal, not when I was there, but the folks doing the studies after me, they have a lot of citizen volunteers, and I know a lot of them work through Earthwatch. But we did do some Earthwatch work in the Superior National Forest.
Okay. And a lot of us have probably seen some of the videos of wolves in Minnesota and other areas eating blueberries. And you talked about the Arctic hares and the musk oxen. Are there berries or other things that the wolves in the Arctic are eating?
Basically, it would, now and then they'd catch fish or seals where the, like in summer, sometimes the ice cracks and the seals come, they come up and they have their own holes there where they bear their young in that, and the wolves take the seals. They take ptarmigan and small birds' eggs and that type of thing, but there are no berries or anything there for them to eat.
Sure. And how do you think climate change has affected the wolves in the Arctic? Has it changed pack sizes or prey or anything like that?
The only thing I've seen, and I have studied that, I did see a couple of summers, excuse me, a couple of summers where I got to give you a little background first. The prey animals there, the Arctic hares and the musk oxen, they only have like from about late June until say early September when the vegetation is available because it's covered with snow for the rest of the year. So they have to do all of their putting on any of their fat or anything during that summer period. Now, in those couple summers, forgot what one they were, 1998, I think one, and then a few years before, those summers, actually, it snowed a lot even during those summers. And that reduced the amount of time that the musk oxen and the hares had to put on any weight. And therefore, the following year, there was no reproduction. And that's what I saw. In other words, I got up there the following year in each of these cases and saw that there were no young Arctic hares, there were no muskox calves. And therefore, after that, the number of wolf pups were lower. And I published an article on that. And that was a type of, and that was two extreme summers that could be attributed to climate change, because climate change, not only do the summers get, or do the temperatures get warmer, but also climate change tends to promote extremes. And in this case, apparently promoted the extreme basic lower temperatures and snowfall during the summer in that area, which then translated to poorer reproduction on the prey, which translated to poorer reproduction on the part of the wolves. That's the kind of change that I would expect for global climate change, not a general change in the wolf numbers. In other words, local differences, but looked at across all of the whole range of the wolf, which is circumpolar. Wolves live all across the northern hemisphere. There's tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands in Europe and Asia. And so across that whole area, I don't think wolves are going to have a problem as a species, but local populations of wolves could run into situations like I documented up on Ellesmere.
Sure, it'll be interesting to see that as we continue to study it. Are there any polar bears or other animals on the island that the wolves had competition over carcasses?
Well, they don't have such competition. There are certainly polar bears there, but the polar bears stay along the shore. So they don't come inland where the wolves are killing the carcasses. I'm sure that if the wolves had killed a seal out there on one of the fjords, which they do, and a polar bear came along, there would be some interactions, but nothing that I ever was in the position to see. And I doubt that that happens very often, because wolves generally spend more of the time inland and the bears along the shore.
Sure. You had mentioned that there was a group of roughly 20 Arctic wolves that were seen. Do you think they had more than one breeding female, which sometimes happens with those big packs in Yellowstone?
It has been documented on Ellesmere, yes.
And do you think drones would have been or could be useful today in monitoring and observing wolves either there or anywhere, I think?
Yes, yes, they could be. And actually, some of the films that have been made, you could Google these films. There's about 4 films or 5 that have been made up on Ellesmere now, not just the ones that I was involved with, but some later on in 2014, 15, 16. Some of those films were actually done with drones. There was some wonderful, wonderful footage from drones in some of those films.
Awesome. Do you know what the average lifespan of the Ellesmere wolves is?
It's very difficult to even come up with the notion, or it's difficult to deal with the notion of average lifespan, because a lot of pups die real quickly when they're just days old, and other wolves live long times, but not very many of them do. All I can tell you is that I did document one of my wolves that I could identify each year living to be at least 13 years old, and that in other places, like in the Superior National Forest, documented wolves 13 years old. But I would say that I can't speak to Ellesmere on this because I don't have enough information. But like in the Superior National Forest, any wolf over 10 years old is pretty rare. And any wolf over 5 years old, this is in the Superior National Forest, while not rare, would be unusual.
Sure.
That might give you some idea.
Sure, thank you. So with those larger packs, do the individual wolves tend to disperse as often as those in other areas, or are their packs more stable and they stay within that natal pack?
You know, we don't know a lot about that. That is an interesting subject that we're looking at. We, meaning me and several other wolf biologists, are interested in that. What happens is that when you get these larger packs, the reason you get them, for example, Yellowstone's a good example, is that that usually happens where there's a surplus of prey, like in Yellowstone, and you start with say a pack of a pair of adults and their offspring, and in most places, when those offspring got to be 1, 2, or 3 years of age, they would disperse from the pack, certainly by 3 years of age. And in Yellowstone, some of those don't disperse, but rather stay with the pack. That makes the pack larger. And then some of those animals that stay, some of the females, actually some of the daughter females start breeding with the pack, and that increases the size of the pack. So sorting out what are the various causes behind large packs, you have to take all those things into consideration. Some of the reason is that some of the wolves don't disperse, whereas in other packs they might in other areas they might disperse, but then you get the daughters living and with the pack, staying with the pack and reproducing with them, and that also makes the pack larger. So we're not sure of all the ins and outs of that, but it is something that we're interested in studying.
Sure, definitely. Where can people get involved in current studies with wolves? Any resources or universities or projects that you know of that people can get involved with?
If you're talking about lay people, I have to say there's a lot of competition for such positions, because there's plenty of students who are training in this field to do that are also competing for those positions. So there aren't many places that I know of where lay people can get involved. The one place I do know of, or at least it used to be, and I think it's still the case, is on Isle Royal in Lake Superior. That studies being done by the National Park Service and also by Michigan Technological University. You could Google wolf and moose study on Isle Royal. There's a website for it, and I think they still take people, citizen scientists on that project. That's the only one I can say for sure that I know of.
Okay. And just a reminder to everyone, we are going to wrap up in just a couple of minutes. So if we did not get to your question, I will be sending those to Dave, and we will send out the answers to those as soon as we can. But I think we'll end this with the last question is, because Ellesmere is a rather contained area, do you notice any health issues among the wolves?
We have not noticed any health issues among the wolves. We have done a genetic study of them, and it is true that they are more inbred than the populations farther to the south. If anyone's interested in that, we can send them an article that we have on that.
Okay, fantastic. And like I said, if we did not get to your question, I will be sending these along to Dave, and we'll be getting back to you with those. But Dave, I wanted to let you know that you'll get these as well, but there are many comments about how interesting this was, and thanking you so much. So I also wanted to say just thank you to all of the participants who joined us tonight. And Dave, thank you so much for sharing all of this information and stories.
And thank you all for your interest and attention.
Thank you, everyone. Have a great night.